there are several free ways to find motivated sellers. But when you're talking about free ways, then the free means that you're going to put your time in, right? That means you're going to sort of bust your knuckles a little bit and do the work and find the motivated sellers. And then there are a few different paid ways to find motivated sellers.
Welcome to the Peak Profits Podcast, your guide to maximizing returns in passive real estate investing. Hosted by Brian Morris and Chris Ward of 7 Peak Capital, we dive into conversations with industry experts, sharing insights, strategies, and stories to elevate your investment portfolio. Whether you're a seasoned investor or just starting out, this podcast is designed to give you the edge for financial freedom. Get ready to unlock new opportunities, discover the secrets of successful investing, and take your passive real estate investments to the next level. Now, let's go reach those peak profits together.
Welcome back to another episode of Peak Profits Podcast. In this episode, we're joined by Bob Mastroianni, a seasoned real estate investor with 17 years of experience in buy and hold, fix and flip, multifamily, and wholesale real estate. Bob's also the host of the Healthy Investor podcast, where he explores the journeys of investors and entrepreneurs, highlighting the healthy habits and routines that drive their success. He recently launched the Healthy Investor community on Skool, aimed at guiding newcomers through the initial stages of real estate investing. Bob, we'd love for you to introduce yourself and share a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, great. I'm really gracious to be on here. I really appreciate you guys having me on. Also, it's great to catch up with you. I know it's been a little bit. So I guess, we'll back up all the way to the beginning. I've been investing in real estate for about 17 years. And it's interesting. So how that even happened, and now I'm going to go back a little bit deeper. My wife and I, when we were first engaged, I remember her saying to me, I want to buy a house. And leading up to that point, I was almost 30 years old at the time. I had never lived in a house that we owned. So I had only been a renter. And so my wife said that she wanted to buy a house. Of course, we're getting married, we're going to settle down, buy a home, raise a family, all of that stuff. And it almost didn't occur to me to buy a house because I had been a renter my whole life. And then, at the time I started purchasing a couple books. The very first book I bought was a book about buying properties that were in distress, about foreclosures. And I was like, I just have to learn about this because I had heard that people were buying properties a little bit cheaper from the bank. Again, keep in mind, this was right before the real estate bubble. We're talking 2005, 2006. And as I started to read these books, I was like, wow, this makes sense to me. This whole real estate investing thing makes sense to me. And so fast forward a little bit, we wound up actually purchasing a new construction townhome. So we didn't go the foreclosure route or anything. But then after we were married, I still had this itch and I was reading more books. Now I'd been introduced to David Bach, The Automatic Millionaire, which talks about, investing automatically, and then eventually found Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And that I just said, I know I can do this. I know I can do this. And so we started out investing. The very first property that we invested in, we had a partner on the deal. It was a fix and flip opportunity in Philadelphia. I laugh because we purchased that property on, Halloween Day, October 31st, 2008. And anyone who has researched, I see the smiles coming on. Anyone who's researched the real estate market knows that in the first and second week of November in 2008, everything went. Yeah. And so we purchased this property as a fix and flip. It was going to be our first investment. Learned a lot of lessons. And we were fortunate enough to split a little bit of money when we finally sold the property about a year later. And then we moved that money into a 3-unit property in Philadelphia. We were able to then purchase a BRRRR, buy, renovate, rent, refinance property in Philadelphia that's a 2-unit. And then the ball just kept rolling from there. And then we sort of figured out the ways to cash out, refinance, use that money to purchase another property. And then for the next several years, want to talk about a mind block that I had. When I first started investing in real estate, I was looking for mentors and I was trying to find someone who could help me. And I'll get back to that a little bit when we get a little further down the journey. But someone had told me in the beginning, they were like, you just got married, you don't have a lot of money. Why don't you start wholesaling? And I'm from Philly. People in the Northeast tend to be a little bit more cynical. I thought it was the biggest scam in the world. And so for 8 years, I knew about wholesaling and wouldn't try it. And then in 2016, I met a mentor who had a fix and flip business, a really large fix and flip business. And he brought me on as a full-time acquisitions manager. And then eventually I started learning dispositions too. And then so for the next about 4 years, leading right up to the pandemic, that's all I did. I was in acquisitions and I helped people who were motivated sellers. I helped them to unload these properties that they did not know how to get rid of. I learned a lot about that. And at the time I learned about, okay, are we going to wholesale this property? Are we going to fix and flip this property? Are we going to find another solution for this person? And so that sort of was a great part of a learning experience for me. I've learned a lot about it over the years. And then as I continue to progress, I moved into some larger multifamily. I've invested in some larger multifamily properties. So over the course of 17 years, absolutely. I've never actually calculated it, but I know I've been involved in literally millions of dollars in real estate transactions. And currently we own 133 units, and that's sort of where we sit today. And then, as you mentioned earlier, I just began this community, this great community called the Healthy Investor Community, which is I'm utilizing the Skool platform. And really my purpose there is that, when I first started out, if it wasn't for books and a little bit of hard knocks, the only options I could find in the beginning were like 25 grand to get a mentor and 30 grand to get a mentor. And I think there's a great place for that. I think, I've paid those sorts of dollars as I progressed, but I don't think that's for entry level. I don't think that's for the people who are just starting out and not even sure if they like it or understand it. And so I'm trying to create a resource where I could be that value for people, utilize my 17 years of investing experience. We say you either win or learn a lesson in this industry. And so I have a lot of lessons to share. And that's, and I think that brings us up to today, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. There's a lot to unpack there and an incredible journey so far in the 17 years since you've got into the industry or really took a liking to real estate. And I can only imagine where the next 17 years takes you right now with all the knowledge that you learned. But great to hear you're from Philly. I know we connected at one of the Knoxville events that Chris and I went to and met you originally. And I myself are from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, so not too far away, right?
Oh, okay.
We talked about this, yep. And but want to go back to the beginning of the journey, and I like what you mentioned there. Like at first, it was all started with your mindset, like I know I can do this now. Let me just get started and buy a house with my wife, right? You've had a lot of experience in the different avenues of real estate, right? You mentioned BRRRR, you mentioned fix and flip, you mentioned wholesale. What in the beginning do you feel like you learned by having your maybe hand in the basket in all these kind of avenues in real estate to get started and really have a more full understanding of the industry by kind of doing all the different projects that you did?
Yeah, I think some of it was sort of trial by fire. When we bought that first fix and flip property, I think I spent many evenings there. I had a full-time job and I would go there, every night. I would stop and grab a slice of pizza on my way there or something and work for 4 or 5 hours and rip cabinets down and put cabinets up. And I learned how to tile and I learned a lot of skills in the beginning that I would now say an investor shouldn't take part in. And so, I'm not afraid to get my hands dirty. I'm not afraid to learn how to do a lot of these things. But time value of money would tell me that I could spend a lot more time looking for the next opportunity, finding the next opportunity, finding the financing and the funding for the next opportunity while that opportunity while we find someone who is so much better at doing the fix and flip, doing the work, and then more project management based than, putting the boots on and buying the tools and all that sort of stuff. So I think that was a really big lesson in the beginning. I also think that one of the lessons that I learned on that very first opportunity that I still utilize to this day, I've been involved in a lot of transactions where money wasn't the biggest motivator for the seller. And I think a lot of newer investors don't understand that because they think we'll find the right price and the seller will sell. And on that very first opportunity, sort of a sad situation, it was an older couple. Their daughter had passed away. She had a really sad struggle with cancer, and they inherited a house, but they also inherited the rights and responsibilities of their two young grandchildren who were both not even teenagers yet. And when we went through that process with them, they didn't know what to do. And quite frankly, that house was not their biggest priority. And that check was not their biggest priority. It was about sort of creating a solution for them that worked. They would have, of course, put some money aside for the kids, but they had other things to worry about. And as I moved forward in my career and as I started in acquisitions management, that ability to really find out, especially when you're dealing with motivated sellers, and we talk about that caption of motivated sellers, it's sort of a different category of people. And oftentimes it's just not related to the specific dollar amount. It's about finding what the right solution is for them. And I think I learned that in the beginning, and today, 17 years later, it's still the same. Markets come and go, market cycles come and go, interest rates do whatever interest rates do. But, when you can find what the right solution is for that person, it's not always just the number on the contract. Sometimes it's time. I can't tell you the amount of properties that we have had under contract where it was like, oh my God, there's just so much junk in this house and I don't want to have to get it out. Right. Sometimes that's the solution. Sometimes it's the time. Sometimes it's helping them find a new place. Sometimes, sometimes estate sales. I can go down a whole path. I could probably talk for an hour just about some of the things I've learned working with estate sales. But again, when you're dealing with people who are motivated because it's an estate sale, like, can you put them in contract with a lawyer who can help them get through the probate process? All of those sort of things. So I think the biggest lessons in my time in this industry have been about really finding the right solution for that person and listening to what they say.
And that's obviously a tragic story and requires a lot of kind of personal touch and empathy as you navigate those waters. What are the things that you put into practice, Bob, when you're speaking to these people initially? Because not many people will come out and share that level of detail the first time you're meeting with them. You're kind of going through conversations. How do you approach those types of conversations? Do you have any tips or tricks of what you do? You're obviously a very personable person. So not everybody can replicate that, but there must be things that, and the way that you carry yourself, the way that you approach those beginning conversations that get you to ultimately the main reason as to why those people are motivated to sell.
Yeah. There's some tips and tricks, I guess I've learned over time. Conversation, be relatable. Don't be fake. I think, I'm authentically me. There was a time period, and my wife always laughs about this story, but there was a time period my daughter was taking piano lessons, and it seemed like every other estate sale house that I went into had a piano. And I would say, my daughter's 8 years old. She also plays piano, which normally would get a response of, oh, yes, that's the piano my children learned on, or that's the piano the grandchildren learned on. And it just made for a conversation and have them feel real. And I joke because I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, even if you don't buy the house, I want you to take the piano. but just finding something that makes it relatability. And then I had a mentor teach me years ago that when you're walking around the property, you're going to create a relationship, whether you want to or not. And there's some relationship building that's happening as you're walking the property. But until you can actually get them to sit at the kitchen table and speak with you, or sit, sometimes it means at the sofa, and speak with you, they probably don't have a comfort level with you. So if you're walking around, especially in these tougher situation properties, if you're walking around and there's never a green light to just sit down and talk, they're probably not very comfortable with you. Because I think that's what people do, right? They especially if you're in a home, right? You're in a home that was the family home or something like that. When they feel comfortable enough to have a seat with you and sit and talk, then you've started to create a relationship. And oftentimes what happens is people come in, they walk around the property, they look at the heater and they look at the water heater, and then they look at the plumbing and they look at the electrical panel, and then they write a number down on a piece of paper and say, well, we'll buy it for this amount. And there's no relationship created there. And so why do they want to work with you? Know, like, and trust, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. There's so much more that goes into these transactions with, mom and pop owners or owners who have owned these properties for a long time that have emotions attached to them, right? And there's a personal feel and touch that needs to go into that, and a level of trust as well. And so you've obviously done this a lot and have a track record of talking to these motivated sellers. Is there a certain strategy or a way you go about identifying, where to find these motivated sellers, where to find, because this is very competitive, right? Many people ask how to get into a space and how to find a deal, how to find a property that might not be on market, but a scenario that could be one that where you might find a motivated seller to go talk to. Could you elaborate a little bit on some of the strategies you've used over the years to identify some?
Yeah, absolutely. And so there are a couple different theories. And so again, when we talked about mentors, it's right. It's like some people are going to be kind of entry level, and some people are going to be next level, and some people are even going to be level above that. There are several free ways to find motivated sellers. But when you're talking about free ways, then the free means that you're going to put your time in, right? That means you're going to sort of bust your knuckles a little bit and do the work and find the motivated sellers. And then there are a few different paid ways to find motivated sellers. So some of the free ways that I've used and that we still use today, I mean, it's no different. You can go to the courthouse. You can go to the courthouse today, in the 2 counties that are closest to me. They let you sit in front of the computer. You can sit there with your laptop. You can't access anything from online or anything away from there, but you can go right through the probate records and you can go straight down the list, and you could say, okay, these are all the people who passed away and they went through a probate, and did they own a property? In most cases, there's a little button there that says real estate owned, yes or no. Did they own a property? Yes. Okay. What's the address? And so that's one of the free ways, right? You can go. And when we first started doing this, I would go to the courthouse every other week. And I sat there with my computer and I pulled up the address on their system. And then I pulled up the address on my computer. And then I looked at it. You could look at everything on Google, right? I looked at it and said, okay, is this thing on a main highway? If it's is it in a neighborhood? Because we wanted to buy properties that were in neighborhoods. Is it in a neighborhood? Yes. Okay. Want to make sure it's not, this person lived in an apartment building and it's not going to be something that's saleable. And then I'll go to the tax records, and tax records are public records, right? I go to the tax records, make sure that the name that's on the probate matches the name that's on the tax records. Now it makes sense. Okay, that's a keeper. If it doesn't match, another thing that we did is that if the person's heir was a spouse, we didn't reach out to them. We never reached out to grieving widows. That just wasn't part of the plan. And so I did that every other week for months. And then eventually, as we started to expand, then we brought on an assistant, and I taught them how to do it. And that's how you sort of elevate. So there are a lot of free ways to do that. You could do the same thing with non-owner occupied lists. Right? You just pull the tax records of all the properties in the neighborhood that you're interested in. And if the address of the owner is the same as the address of the property, then they live there, chances are. If the address of the owner is different than the address of the property, then they probably don't live there, right? So it's non-owner occupied. So there's a bunch of different ways. I often say that the courthouse, there's a lot of money to be made in the courthouse, but people are afraid to walk in those doors. So that's one sort of entry level way. We've also utilized lead services. There are services where they create SEO, search engine optimization. And so somebody goes online and says, I live in Philly and I need to sell my house, and all these sites pop up and they fill out a form, and then we purchase the lead. So we purchase the lead for a certain amount of money, and then we follow up with that lead. So that's a paid way that you can do that. You can do the same thing with probate. When I was sitting at the courthouse writing down the probate names, a guy came in and sat next to me. I asked him what he was doing. He said, I work for a company. We're doing the same thing you're doing, only when I walk out of here, I'm going to sell these leads to 6 people. Right? So I could have then paid that guy to do exactly what I was doing. Right. I quickly learned in the process that I was more efficient at it than him, but that's a side story. So that's another way. And then the third way is that if you have the ability to create SEO, and if you have the ability to create these type of lead magnet funnel sites, that's not a strength of mine. And so, that's something that you could go and create, and maybe it's a little bit less expensive than paying for lead magnets. And we really like the motivated sellers who have raised their hand and said, yes, I have a property. Yes, I want to sell it. They're a little bit easier to deal with than the people who you've cold reached out to and they've said, well, no, maybe I don't want to sell it. So, and that's where SEO comes in. So do you want to pay somebody to do that SEO, or do you want to do it yourself? Do you want to bring in a virtual assistant who could maybe do it or something like that? So those are just a few of the methods that we've utilized. We've obviously utilized postcard campaigns, mailing campaigns, email campaigns, text campaigns, and all those sort of things too. So there's been a variety, but we just keep trying what works. Yeah.
And which of those methods have you found most successful, Bob? Because there's many, many different ways to reach out to somebody who has, whether they've raised their hand or whether you've gone through the court records and you've identified somebody. Like, which are the most common or the most successful ones for you? But also, how do you prioritize the people that you're going to reach out to? Because you may find 50, 100 people on those lists, but does every single one of those make sense? You mentioned a few criteria there, like, is it next to a highway? Is it an apartment within a building? Not every single one of those properties potentially makes sense. So how do you kind of narrow that down? And then which of those approaches have you found most successful?
Yeah, so it sort of ebbs and flows. We went through a long time period where texting was working, and it was very genuine conversation. And the text is the easiest thing in the world. It's like, hey, Chris, are you still looking to sell that house on Main Street? That's it. And they respond, right? Not, hello, Christopher, are you still looking to sell your property at 123 Main Street, Philadelphia, PA, 19134? Like, no, that's not real. That's not authentic. Yeah. People aren't going to respond to that. But I feel like text outreach has really increased. So it sort of ebbs and flows. I would say right now I'm more interested in smaller multifamily properties. So that really changes the list, because we just look at what the property looks like, right? Is it a 1 to 4 unit residential, or I should say 2 to 4 unit residential? Okay, that's going to fit the list. Is it a larger multifamily? We're interested in larger multifamily also. When I was working specifically with fix and flip operators, then I wanted to know what they wanted. That's also an important thing. If you're ever looking to potentially wholesale a property, a lot of wholesalers get it wrong. They think the first thing that they should do is go get a property under contract and then try and find somebody who wants it. The real first step is to find the investors and find out what they want, and then go get that. Because, again, I worked with an investor for a long time. He bought a lot of properties from me, and he said, I don't want any properties where there's a double yellow line down the middle of the street.
Oh, wow.
He just felt like that meant it was higher traffic, wasn't really neighborhood. His target after the flip, his target buyer was a first time home buyer, which usually is someone who's maybe, you know, getting ready to start a family or thinking of starting a family or something like that. And he just felt like, so I never brought him a property that had a double yellow line down the middle of the street. Right. So when we go and look at those things, you know, what are your, you know, the town that's sort of right across the street from me has a little pocket. It used to be a fishing town. It used to be a vacation fishing town. And so there's a whole bunch of 1-bedroom houses. I haven't found any fix and flip investors who want to buy a 1-bedroom house and flip it. So I don't go there. Right.
Yeah.
So I think,
Right.
you know, I think that's one of the ways that you start narrowing it down. You have to know, if you're looking to wholesale it, you have to know who's going to buy it or who's going to potentially buy it. Because if not, when you go the opposite way and you just get a bunch of properties under contract and then hope, a lot of times what happens is you're getting out of those contracts and then you start to get a name for somebody who doesn't do what they say they're going to do. So yeah,
Right.
that's when we're talking about what to specifically target, that conversation comes down to, well, what are we looking to do with it? Are we looking to keep it? If we're looking to keep it, then I like multifamily properties.
Right.
If we're looking
And
to
that's a great,
wholesale it, then who's gonna buy it? Yeah.
sure. Yeah, that's a great transition too, because it's, again, touching back on all the experience you've had over the years. You've done a lot of different avenues within real estate, but it seems like you've now transitioned primarily into these smaller 2 to 4 unit residential multifamilies to buy and hold yourself or invest in some of the larger multifamilies
Yeah.
overall, right? More units under one roof.
Mm-hmm.
Could you elaborate a little bit why that's your strategy moving forward? I know Chris and I, that's what we primarily focus on as well, is multifamily moving forward. I started with a single family myself. I did the Burr method, and then I bought a 3 unit. And as soon as I bought that 3 unit, you know, it was a light bulb moment for me in thinking, I have 3 different tenants under one roof. Like, how can I scale this, right? And that was really my thought process. And scaling in a single family house is much more difficult, you know, to buy multiple houses over each year versus buying more under one roof. So can you talk a little bit more about that strategy
Yeah. I
and
mean,
why your focus is primarily multifamily now?
yeah, I think one of the largest expenses of a real estate investment is turnover. And so, you know, when you turn over a single family property, you're 100% vacant, right? Your occupancy rate is 0. And then for however long it takes you to fill that, even if it's 2 weeks, even if it's 15 days, you're at 0. No money's coming in. And so we sort of learned that same lesson too. Our first buy and hold property was a 3-unit property. And it was in an area of Philadelphia that's not all that great. And the area has fortunately gotten a little bit better. But in the very beginning, I remember I had to go in there and, you know, not renew some tenants. And when I wasn't renewing those tenants and they left, and then we went in and painted and we cleaned and we made the place nicer, 2 other checks were still coming in, right? Of the 3. And it was like, okay, great. I'm still paying the mortgage every month. I'm still paying the bills every month. I'm just not making any money. Okay, great. And then when we fill that 3rd unit, we're going to start making money. So, you know, I think that's the biggest reason that we look at multifamily. You know, 4 checks coming in, only 1 roof to repair, right? You know, there are some expenses on the other side that are a little bit different. You know, we've fully remodeled some multifamily properties, and when you're fully remodeling multifamily properties, the most expensive things in remodel are kitchens and bathrooms. So now you have 2 kitchens, 2 bathrooms, 4 kitchens, 4 bathrooms, whatever it is, right?
Right.
So the scalability is a little bit different there, but I just feel that especially when it comes to tenant turnover, you know, and there are times that we're dealing with vacancies, and even if it's for a short amount of time, some money's still coming in, and it's usually enough because we know how to analyze these opportunities. It's usually enough to make sure that we're still covering the expenses.
One of the common misconceptions for people that are potentially looking to invest in properties or multifamily properties is that the only way to do that is cash. But Bob, you've proved over the kind of last year or so that there are other methods and you've successfully done that, and that is through self-directed IRAs. Would love it if you could share a little bit about your story and how powerful a self-directed IRA can be in terms of investing into property or multifamily properties or whatever that ultimately might be. And maybe you could elaborate a little bit on your process that you went through as well, because again, some people may not have heard of what a self-directed IRA even is. So just sharing that it's not maybe as scary as people initially think as well.
So what I didn't mention in the beginning is that when I was doing my first fix and flip, my career actually was that I worked in HR and benefits. And so my job was that every time someone was hired, I had to explain to them how to sign up for their 401k and put your money in this 401k. And I also calculated pensions, but that's a bit of a different conversation. And because Ks are generally run by your job or your business, most cases people don't understand that is their money. And a lot of times when you're in the job, you really can't do anything with that 401k money other than keep it active in that account. I mean, you could borrow against it, but you can't really take the money. You have limited control of where that money goes, right? So if your company says, okay, we have a 401k and it's through Fidelity, you get to decide which investments of Fidelity's that you want to put that money in, and you can sort of move it around in there, but you have limited amount of ability to decide where that money is going. And generally speaking, all of those options are stock related, right? Stocks and mutual funds related.
Yep.
And so as I learned a little bit more about what this self-directed IRA is, essentially what I did was I had an old 401k that was sitting in an old company. I hadn't touched it, wasn't necessarily performing very well. And there was a little over $150,000 in this 401k. And so essentially what I decided to do is I wanted to invest in some larger multifamily opportunities. And I found some operators that I really trusted, opportunities that made sense. And so I did a rollover and I rolled that money I created a self-directed IRA. That IRA, I did it through Fidelity, but there's several other options. I'm not necessarily endorsing Fidelity or anything like that, but I did it through Fidelity. And I essentially rolled that money from my old 401k into the Fidelity account. And it's very important that you roll that money because it's not a taxable event, right? So that money went right from the 401k into the IRA. I never received it. And so it never became a taxable event for me. And then through that self-directed IRA, I now have the ability with a custodian to invest that wherever I want to. And so I found a custodian, and that custodian helps me through the process. That custodian doesn't say to you, yes, this is a good deal, or no, this isn't a good deal. But the custodian does look at the paperwork and say, yes, this is legal. So they do kind of peek at that sort of stuff and say, yes, this is a legal offering. And essentially what I did, I invested in two different opportunities. One of the opportunities is in Minneapolis, and then the other opportunity is in Texas. And so I became, they were syndications. I became an investor in two of those opportunities. And they essentially were selling shares by the thousand. And so I decided that, I put 75,000 in one and 75,000 in the other, and became a part owner of those investment opportunities. And now that money, when there's the distribution goes right back into my self-directed IRA. And so I have the ability, because that's in Fidelity, I have the ability to sort of move that around in there. And if it gets to the point where it's built up to invest it in another real estate opportunity, I can, or I could just, continue to invest that. But I'm excited about both of these opportunities. They're newer, and total between the two of them, there's 123 units. It was a very, very simple process. And I would absolutely do it again. And I think a lot of times what happens is that people will leave a job, they'll leave a 401k behind, and it just sits there. And they have this fear that if I touch it, I'm going to get a penalty and I'm going to get a tax. And while that is true, if you touch it the wrong way, there are options. There are other options. And I think the people that do anything oftentimes think that their only option is to roll that into the new job's 401k and then not be able to touch it. Right. So this has been a really good, it's been a great eye-opening experience for me. It's actually run by each of the opportunities was a different group of general partners. So it's interesting to see how they each handle certain things and certain aspects of it. I'm absolutely, kept up to date. We get quarterly reports. We have the ability to ask questions and sort of be involved, but I'm a limited partner, and it's really cool. And it's really cool to sort of be involved in real estate. And then the other part of that is that I put my money where I want it to be. And, I don't claim to know a ton about the stock market. And so when a majority of my money is in there, I feel like I don't have any control over it. I know the people, and you guys know some of the people too that are operators. I know I can call them up, and I know how they will handle situations. And some of those situations have already been, property managers have been fired and marketing plans have changed. And so to be able to see, whenever there's a question or concern, that these things are actually being handled.
That's awesome, Bob. I know a lot of people have mentioned or are unaware of, investing through a self-directed IRA. And I have previously worked at two companies prior to my current W-2 here at Salesforce. And I know I rolled over my old 401ks into a IRA with Fidelity as well. So I am now looking into also rolling that money into a custodian to invest into other properties as well. And I think just what you mentioned, like it's just a lack of education that a lot of people just don't understand that this is an avenue, right? They think that if you touch your 401k, there'll be a penalty, and there may be if you withdraw that money, but you can roll it over and invest into other avenues of investments other than stocks and bonds. So you mentioned the process was seamless. Can you give us a little bit of an idea of how long it took from rolling that money over to deciding that, the investment of the properties that you want to invest in, and then ideally and then wiring that money over to the property?
Yeah. So I actually, I didn't create my self-directed IRA until I found the first property.
Okay.
And so that whole process was less than 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Between, 401k has to send a check to the self-directed IRA. I paid for them to wire it. I think it was like $25. So it's just like, I don't want to wait for the mail to make this happen. So just wire it over. I'd rather know that the money's going to be in there in a day or two. That's really actually the longest part, because they have to decide to part with the money. And then from there, it was a 24-hour move from Fidelity to the custodian. And then the biggest reason that I actually created Fidelity, and this is probably a little bit deeper into the conversation, but I could have actually moved all the money directly into the custodian account. I could have just set it up directly with the custodian, but I didn't have the second opportunity, and I didn't want to rush to find the second opportunity. I knew I was only going to use half the money for the first opportunity, and the custodian account only has the ability to hold that money as cash. And so it would be invested in nothing. It would be, and I was like, I don't know, it might be 9 months before I find this next opportunity. And I had to take all of the money out of the 401k. I couldn't take a partial distribution based on the plan rules. So then I moved it into Fidelity, and then I had the ability to, if I wanted to, decide to invest that in any of their potential options temporarily until I found the next opportunity. So there was a lot of paperwork to sign. I think the notice was like 56 pages long or something like that. I mean, but that's any syndication, that's any large investment. You have all of your documentation to sign. And, I was nervous because I think we had 21 days for all funding to be in. I was nervous that I wouldn't make it in time. And there was no problem there. And as a matter of fact, we wound up, settlement was pushed back another week or two. So they had my money long before they needed it. So yeah, that process was pretty simple. And it was all electronic, between DocuSigns and direct transfers and all of that.
It's great to hear that went so smoothly, and again was almost a matter of weeks to get that from start to finish as well. Bob, you've got a number of finisher medals sat behind you on the screen right now, and we know you're very passionate about personal growth, healthy habits. How do you adopt some of that as it comes to real estate, and what do you take from those habits that you're learning from your personal and health into the real estate world?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I didn't find health until I was in my early 40s. And before that, it was just like pizza, wings, and beer, and all those sort of things. And so I was in my early 40s when I found health. But really, the first thing that I found was the Miracle Morning routine. And I'm not sure if you've ever heard of the Miracle Morning. I believe I have the book up there. A gentleman by the name of Hal Elrod created this Miracle Morning. And I first heard about it. He was on a podcast and he was talking about his book, and he was talking about this morning routine. And for me, I told myself the story that I was a night owl, which really just meant that I stayed up late at night watching late night TV. I never went to bed before Conan O'Brien was over, right? And which meant that I had a terrible time waking up in the morning because I was depriving myself of proper sleep. And so I said, I think I need this in my life. And the Miracle Morning focuses on, they call them the savers. And so it's the first S is for silence or meditation. A is for affirmations. V is for visualization. E is for exercise. R is for reading. And then the final S is for scribing or journaling. And so the concept of the Miracle Morning is that sort of wake up an hour earlier than you normally do. And, you do each of those 6 items for about 10 minutes. And it started to energize my day and creating this habit. I sort of did this as a 30-day challenge. And then next thing I know, in the first 2 years, I did it like 635 times or something like that.
Wow.
And so it really became habit. It became something that I did 6 days a week. I didn't always get to it on Sunday, but I absolutely was doing it 5 days a week, and then most Saturdays. And then I started to feel better because I started to have some sort of routine. I was planning out my day, right? I was journaling. Before this, I knew nothing about meditation and the mental aspect of the game. And so I think the first thing for me was really learning how to create a habit, right? Habit around things that, whether you feel like doing it or not, they're going to help you progress. And then eventually I sort of started enjoying that 10 minutes of working out in the morning, that 10 minutes of exercise in the morning, which was just like, in the beginning was just like jumping jacks and some yoga poses. I started to really enjoy that. And then I added to it. And now I do triathlons. We talked a little bit about this. I had my first attempt at an Ironman 70.3 a few weeks ago. Unfortunately, I didn't get to finish, but I made it about 90% of the way. So we'll give that another try. But, the things that I've learned really are about committing to the small steps regularly. And, it's interesting to me. I looked back on my month of June, and I just looked on my little watch app, and it said, okay, you averaged 60 minutes of exercise per day. And I said, wow, okay, 60 minutes of exercise, it's an hour a day. I made a ton of progress, right? It's 30 hours of progress. think about that from a business perspective, right? You do an hour of cold calling, or an hour of content creation, or every day, just an hour, right? Can we do it for an hour? It's 1/24 of your day, right? It's not even a majority of your day. So learning to focus on goals and sort of break them down into those regular routines has really been very beneficial for me. And when I slip off of it, I notice it, and it doesn't always happen right away, but I'm human. I'm not like, right. I'm not Terminator, right? I mean, I slip off. I have times where it's like, it's just not happening. Life happens, right? I have a family, I have a business, I have a job, I have all these things. And sometimes we slip off of it, and then getting back to it is very beneficial for me. And, part of the reason that I started the Healthy Investor podcast was because every time I would speak to successful investors and entrepreneurs, they would tell me about different habits and routines that they had. And I thought, there's such a misconception about what these people are doing. And, I as I started creating a podcast, I would learn, and so many people had different aspects of it. For some, it might be wake up and run 10 miles. And for somebody else, it might be read the Bible every morning. And for somebody else, it might be, a journal or something else. But I really feel like when you're feeling good and when your health is in a better situation, then everything else just kind of goes together. It really kind of all starts to jive at the same time.
No, that's awesome. And that's super inspirational. I mean, you talk about not getting into a healthy mode until you're almost over 40 years old. And now, like, as Chris mentioned, you look behind you, and how many medals do you have back there? I don't know if you've counted, but probably at least 20 to 30.
A couple dozen, but there's an empty spot there for the one that I went for.
Yeah, the Ironman. That one's coming. I know I was following your progress along on Facebook, and you underestimate. You don't give yourself enough credit. You said you got about 90% of the way, but you did, 70.3 miles, and you did like 65 miles of it, right?
Yeah, I did a little over 66 of the 70.3. So
it's incredibly hard.
And the lessons along the way, again, I'm close to 50. I'm about 10 months away from being 50. And, I think one of the things that we all sort of get wrong is that you can do hard things. Mm-hmm. And you could do things that are harder than you thought you can do, but you have to try. And for me, going into this event, I put off doing an Ironman. Two friends of mine who I did it with had done it twice before, and both times I put it off because I said, I can't imagine being on a bike for 3.5 to 4 hours. Like, I can't imagine just being on a bike for that long, right? And then in my training, next thing I know, I'm on a 4-hour bike ride, a 3.5-hour bike ride. And now I look back on that and I say, why was I so afraid of that? And I think as we continue to grow, like, you'll never know your limits unless you try to get to them, right? And in most cases, you're gonna get to them, and then you're gonna realize that you can go even further. And I think that was a lesson in this for me. And that's one that I'll take with me. It's one that I'll absolutely take with me. I don't sit here and say, oh my God, I can never do a 70.3. As a matter of fact, I sit here and say, why did I stop? That's more the conversation that's happening in my head, but I think that's natural.
Again, I think it's inspirational because you can kind of correlate that to both your real estate journey and your health journey, right? Like, the beginning of real estate, you only rented before, and you're like, I have no idea how to buy a house. And here you are now, a partial owner of 123 units. You've done wholesale, fix and flips, multifamily. And now you didn't start this healthy journey until into your 40s. And now here you are at 49 with dozens of medals behind you, right? Well, people will argue that as you get older, right, you don't get as healthy, but you are clearly doing that. But to piggyback off that, I wanted to kind of go into what's next for you, Bob. Like, you've obviously had great success over the last 17 years, both in real estate and now over the last decade with this health journey that you're on. And there's a saying that actually says that you you overestimate what you can get done in a year, but underestimate what you can do in 5 years, right? So if you look back 5 years ago, you probably would have never imagined having all those medals or all the success within real estate. So what's next, and what does these next 3 to 5 years look like for you?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think it falls into a few different things. From an investment perspective, I really, really love this idea of being able to share with others the things that I've learned. And so, I created this community, this healthy investor community in Skool, which is it's a great platform, which gives you the ability to share knowledge, to share information. I'm still building some of it out, but I love being able to share those lessons with others. I also love being able to share some of the things that I've learned in the same way that a guy who had literally a 315 point credit score now is owner of 133 multifamily units and involved in a couple $1 million worth of real estate transactions. That's the same way that the guy who was 39, 40 years old was about 40 pounds overweight, concerned with cholesterol issues and all that kind of stuff, and is now talking about Ironman. I think that I just want to inspire other people to be able to do that. So I think a lot of the next step of my journey is going to be trying to collaborate with other people and help other people from what I've learned. And then I also really value family time. I used to joke when people would say to me, like, why are you doing all this running? Why are you doing all this running? And now I'm right up against it. And I said, and I used to say to them, when I turn 50, I'm going to have a 14-year-old daughter. I need to be able to keep up. And now we're right up against it. But my time with my wife and my daughter is very valuable to me. Just trying to create more the ability for time freedom. And I have this itch right now that is sort of a little bit different, but I have this itch that to potentially buy an existing business. So that's sort of an itch that I've been looking at a lot. I've been looking at a bunch of different opportunities to potentially do something like that. So I think those are the sort of the BHAGs, if you will, big, hairy, audacious goals. Yep. And so we'll see where
I'm sure you'll get to those goals, Bob. You've achieved everything else you've set your mind to, so there's no reason why you can't. And you're definitely an inspiring person. I know, speaking for myself and Brian, that you've inspired both of us since we've had the opportunity
Thank you.
to meet you. Where can people get in touch with you, Bob? You have the Skool and the kind of mentorship program you're building. You've got your podcast. We can obviously add links, but would love for you to just kind of give the listeners the opportunity of where they can find you, where they can connect with you.
Yeah. So, I mean, the best places to connect with me are on the socials right now. I'm regularly starting to go live on TikTok, also on YouTube. YouTube's sort of been a big push for me. I'm starting to do some live videos on YouTube and sharing some knowledge and information. You can also catch me healthy.investor on Instagram, Bob Mastroianni on Facebook. So those are sort of the best places to connect with me. And again, Skool, it's Skool is a platform. It's called the Healthy Investor Community. Right now, everything in there is free. So any knowledge that I put in there, any information that I put in there, it's all free. My goal is to create a paid community, but right now we're building it out. And so I want to bring as many people as I can in and just knowledge share. It's a really cool community where you could just come in. I create videos, I create training sessions, sometimes I just turn on the camera and talk about something that's on my mind, and I could put that video out there. And then there's also a community aspect of it where everyone can post and ask questions and sort of communicate with each other. So those are sort of the big places. And then, of course, the Healthy Investor podcast is we have some changes coming to it as of September. I'm looking forward to how it's going to adjust, but that's on all of the regular podcast channels, that you can find it on.
Awesome. Well, Bob, we want to thank you for coming on Peak Profits today. It was a pleasure talking to you in more detail, learning more about your story. We look forward to continuing to follow your journey and everything you're going to accomplish. Your next Ironman, keep us posted, because that's one of my goals as well. I know Chris and I actually just completed our first half marathon in last year here in Central Park in New York City, which was awesome. And so,
congrats.
Thank you. So on that journey as well, and one day hope to do an Ironman here in the future, but looking forward to continuing to stay connected with you and continue to follow your journey, and hopefully have you back on the podcast in the future when you maybe look to buy that business next. So I want to thank you again for coming on, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Brian and Chris, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you for tuning in to the Peak Profits Podcast. We hope today's episode was not only inspiring, but packed with actionable insights for your passive real estate investments. Subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review. Your feedback fuels our passion to bring you even more valuable content. Stay connected with us on social media and visit 7peakcapital.com for exclusive resources and updates. Until next time, keep striving towards your financial goals, and let's reach new peaks together.